Good morning, everyone. Everyone sat down and got quiet. I guess that means it's my turn to talk, right? My name is Christy Day, and I'm the Director of Communications with the Center for Professional Development. Thank you all for coming, spending some of your summer, we won't call it a vacation, some of your summer with us, because we know that as principals, you're always on the job. So thank you very much for participating. We are going to get started with our next session here, Proactive and Preventative Best Practices. First of all, just let me say, what a tough act to follow. I mean, first of all, I had to go and freshen up the makeup because I'm sure I had raccoon eyes. And we'll have to make sure that we have boxes of tissues the next time we invite Mr. DeAngelis to come to one of our sessions. And those are tears of hope as well, because he's definitely given us some things to think about how he has risen from his trials to triumph. And of course, we know it's an ongoing process. But we're going to go ahead now with our next session. You all have the bios for all of our panelists here who are participating in this next session. Thank them all for coming. I'm just going to read a little bit about them, and you can, of course, do a more thorough reading of who they are and what they do in the information that you have in your packet. Here to my left is Carol Crawford. And she's one of my favorite people because she's the principal of my former middle school, Bridgeport Middle School, of course, in Bridgeport, West Virginia, in Harrison County. Bridgeport Middle School has been recognized as a West Virginia School of Excellence and a West Virginia Exemplary School. And she also works with us very closely as a team leader, and she leads some of our Evaluation Leadership Institute professional development sessions. So thank you very much, Ms. Crawford, for participating today. We also have with us the Prevention Resource Officer from South Charleston High School, Lieutenant Stan Miller. He's a 25-year member of the South Charleston Police Department. He has worked 15 years in local schools as a DARE officer, and 7 years ago, he was assigned to South Charleston High School as their PRO. So thank you very much for joining us here today. And you know, the PROs have a very special place in my heart. I have to tell this. My sister is the chief juvenile probation officer here in Kanawha County, and she has a very special relationship with the PROs, and so I always know that my children are doing exactly what they need to do. There are a lot of eyes on them, so a lot of respect. Thank you very much, Lieutenant, for what you do. Keith Vidito, to my far right, he's the Executive Director of Security for Kanawha County Schools. Prior to that, he served 22 years with the Kanawha County Sheriff's Office. He has also served 17 years as an FBI-certified bomb technician and commanded the Kanawha County Bomb Squad for 10 years. Hazardous duty pay definitely, and if that's not enough, he has served 30 years with the Army National Guard and performed tours of duty in Afghanistan and Iraq. So we thank you so much for your service. And lastly, Charles Warner, to my immediate right. He's the Executive Director of Safety for Kanawha County Schools. That means that he works on safety issues over a 900 square mile radius of Kanawha County. That's 5,000 staff, 28,000 students, and 70 facilities, but who's counting? He's also worked with Dow Chemical Company, where he performs product safety, hygiene, industrial hygiene, product quality studies. That's a mouthful. He worked with Dow for 28 years. And so we thank you very much for joining us as well. Can we give a round of applause to our panel? We're basically going to have a conversation about some of the issues that we're facing, that you're facing, not only as principals, but as a community, issues that we're facing and things that we are concerned about, things that keep you up at night, things that are always on your mind and always in front of you. Fortunately, you have an opportunity to participate later with the cards that you have on your table, so please make sure that you fill those out if you have issues that you would like Mr. DeAngelis to address at a later on today. But first of all, we're going to start with Carol Crawford, and she and I are going to share a mic. The first question is, what strategies, Carol, do you use at your school to make sure all students feel valued and important to your school community?
Well, I think I speak on behalf of all of the principals. I hope I represent you well today. But we believe at our school that students need to feel valued, not just value from adults, but from their peers. We're a middle school, and I think that goes for elementary and high school as well. They need that peer value system. One of the things that we do that we started, and it was unique to our school, was we do clubs for the 8th graders, and the teachers, they don't know who they're signing up to work with, and we build relationships. That's very important to us. We work hard to build a classroom culture. So at the beginning of the school year, at the beginning of every 9 weeks, it's okay with me, and so the teachers are okay with spending a day doing team building activities so the kids feel like a family and they get to know them. So we're doing that. Our 7th grade teachers came up with what I thought was a wonderful idea. In our school, it was always, if you know anything about Bridgeport, athletics is very important to the community. And they would decorate the lockers. The cheerleaders, the football players would always have their lockers decorated, much like when we were in school. And so we backed off of that, and we ordered team magnets. But it's not just for athletic teams. If you are in the show choir, you have a magnet for your locker. If you're in the quiz bowl, if you're the spelling bee, or if you're an order, you have a magnet. And then the 7th grade teachers went a step farther because as they walked around, many students had no recognition. So in their classrooms, they would use just a simple die-cut machine, and the kids would have a shape, and it would have Joe's name on it, and they pass it around, and every student put one word. And then the next morning when they came in, everybody's locker had a magnet on it. And the kids were shocked to find out that people think they're funny, or that they're kind, or that they're handsome. So I thought that went a long way to have recognition from your peers. We always welcome our students at the door, whether it's the front door, the classroom doors, and something that I heard Lincoln High School did after culture typology years ago, and I thought, when Mr. DeAngelis was speaking, I thought, I need to do that. They took pictures of all of their, and I believe it was seniors, so I'm not going to say this exactly right, but the counselors had posted around the hallway before school started a picture of every senior, and then they gave the teachers those little sticky dots, and they went around, and if you knew that student's name, there was a dot, if you had them in class. And they were, I think, in awe and shocked of how many students didn't have a sticker. So how important it is to mentor and get to know your students. And you, Mr. DeAngelis said that you have to know your clients. So we work hard to know all of our kids.
Thank you very much, Carol, for that. And we're going to stay on this side of the table, and we're going to ask Stan to tell us about some of the ways you see the PRO being particularly effective in the building, in building relationships with students to promote a safer school environment. Your role that you really play in that and how you see that's really having an impact.
What we found is kind of it's kind of turned into something really great, is that you become that student's or that school's police officer. And those students recognize you as their police officer. I've been out many times in the public, and my wife and I will be walking through with my 8-year-old, and you'll have a teenager come up and say, "Hey mom, hey dad, that's my police officer." And they come to learn that you're not just a uniform or a badge. They come to know you as a person. And the PRO program in West Virginia, you know, we prevent, our things we're supposed to do is prevention, safety, and mentoring. And in the mentoring part, it's very important to take an interest in the kids so that they take an interest in you. I do a lot of the extracurricular activities. I'll go to ball games, you know, and trips and such. And I don't forget the little clubs either. You know, the Eagles for Christ, or the even the band club that, you know, where they were in there playing with their guitars. So I played guitar. So I took my amp in there and let them use it all year. And they just thought that was the greatest thing. I found out one kid took it home. He brought it back. But you know, they couldn't believe that a police officer would play guitar. And because they think that we're so unapproachable. When you break down that barrier and make yourself approachable by these young people, and I don't call them kids, you know, when I'm teaching or talking to them, I call them young adults. And I always put across to them that, you know, the world that they live in is so much different than the world I lived in and grew up in, that, you know, unfortunately, they're forced to grow up too soon. And with the burden that brings a lot of responsibility that they need to work into. And being a police officer gives you a little bit of a different aspect on their lives, because as a teacher or as an administrator, 99% of the time you see them in an office setting, in a sterile setting, sitting there. Well, as police officers, we go into their homes. We know what their home life is sometimes. And it gives us a better perspective on how to help them, direct them, and get them the help that they need. And having a police officer in your school allows you to have that open door too, because the police officer in my school, we share information daily. I mean, if something happened with a student over the course of a weekend or over a night, the road guys will send me an email and say, hey, we dealt with so-and-so in this incident and just wanted you to know. Well, then I can take that back to the school and tell the principal, hey, so-and-so had a really rough night last night. We'll need to keep an extra eye on them. And, this program, Handle with Care, that the U.S. Attorney's Office has brought to us is remarkable and great, and we can't wait to start it full-blown when we use it. But, I mean, there are so many aspects of touching their lives. It's more than just classroom. It's more than just in the hallway. It's being someone that they see all the time and recognize you as a person, not just a uniform or a suit or the principal. Once they relate to you as a person, then they'll share stuff with you more so than you would ever think. And that's one of the things I've noticed also is, as a PRO in the school, the students will come to me before they come to the counselors or the teachers or the principals about things, because, well, we've made it available to them for the outside resources. And as much as schools try, you all have a daunting task, and I would not be in your position at all because of the burden that you all carry with the stuff you have to do. But we always reach out to our famous saying is, if we don't know the answer, we'll find the answer. And we have the resources of the community around us to use that. And I think if schools would start utilizing the PRO and reaching out in the communities, that you'd find that the kids will respond, the young adults will respond a lot better.
Very good. And also there's information about the Prevention Resource Officer Program in the state, how you can get how you can make contact with that if you don't have a PRO, resources that are available to help support that locally for you. So make sure you take a look at that. And there are also contact someone here at the center. You can talk to us individually if you need more information about that as well. All right, thank you very much, Lieutenant Stan. Let's move right along. Our next question is for Charlie. We want to talk a little bit about the mental health issues that our students are facing. As a community, as a nation, it's becoming more and more of an issue, more prevalent. I don't know if it's more prevalent or we're talking more about it, we're giving more attention to it. So mental health concerns are prevalent in the general public, of course, and schools. What are schools doing now to better identify, report, and react to students or staff who display behavior that warrants concern?
First of all, I'd like to thank you for the privilege of being here today, and I was certainly moved by Mr. DeAngelis' presentation. Also had the privilege of sitting in meetings or in discussions, seminars with Phil Chalmers and Dave Grossman. And it's quite a daunting task, first of all, whenever we deal with schools. As stated previously, I worked approximately 28 years in the private sector. Just recently, in the last couple of years, been involved with the school system and in the role of the safety advisor, safety director. I will tell you that in any effective risk management program, we have to identify our assets, and certainly in our school system, our students and our staff and our community are our most valuable assets. We also have to determine the level of threat and the probability of those type of threats, what type of controls that we're going to put in place to try to mitigate those threats. And then we need to evaluate the effectiveness of those type of controls, and then we have to monitor to its continuous process. One thing that Kanawha County Schools did last year, and I certainly want to give kudos to the West Virginia Department of Education, is we've adopted their crisis prevention and response plans. It's a very, very comprehensive plan. Whenever we looked at it, we contacted Mike Pickens, Sheila Diaz, other folks in the Department of Ed. We began to do school-specific plans for every school in Kanawha County School, which is a total of 71 schools and a number of collaborative efforts. So every school in Kanawha County has an individual crisis response plan that has a mental health section in that. And so the mental health section of that plan is in 4 steps. First of all, the first step is preparedness. So what those plans have done, our counselors have actually, school counselors have identified what type of school resources as well as community resources that are available to address behaviors and problems that are identified within the student body. Every crisis plan, mental health section has all those contact informations. We've identified those community folks that will participate and aid whenever needs have been identified. We've also have all of the contact information for the administrators and for our school psychologists, our school counselors, our school social workers, our special education teachers, our nurses, and all the other folks that make up that portion of that mental health plan. So from a preparation standpoint, we've identified the key players that will address issues whenever they occur. The second step is in prevention. And what we have to do is we have to try to create a positive school climate environment. I spent approximately 2 years as an educator after Union Carbide and literally realized that if I wanted to retain and keep the home that my wife and I had built, that probably ought to find a different job, because certainly once you're an adult and you've not worked around students, and then whenever I actually got in the classroom, I realized, wow, I mean, this is phenomenal, and I certainly applaud the efforts of those individuals who make this their occupation for life, especially those individuals who have a passion for the children. I certainly appreciate that. But the things that we have to do is, in those type of things, is once again to identify behaviors. And folks, you guys as administrators know much more, those type of indicators that you see in students, what type of behaviors, when their grades begin to fall. I had a PRO officer call me one day and said, hey, I've got a cutter in my school that's self-mutilator, and things like that. And so as teachers, as instructors, as administrators, whenever you identify any type of problematic things that are occurring in children's life, whether it's a domestic type of situation, whether it's a divorce, then these children are more predisposed to have mental health issues. And so we prepare, we prevent, and then we respond. Whenever we identify at-risk students, then we respond, especially when situations occur. We try to restore equilibrium, stability in the school as quick as possible. And once again, we utilize all the resources, all the community resources. I know that in Kanawha County, I think we have Damas, Prestera, other agencies outside the school system, and some of them actually have offices inside the school system to aid these at-risk children. And so once again, we try to restore stability. We try to use our professionals to teach coping mechanisms, problem solving, decision making, things like this. And trust me, administrators sometimes are the first line of defense, because a lot of times they'll tell other students, the students will report information to administrators. We've had that happen in the school system many times. We're made aware of situations because a student will tell another student, a trusted student. That student will contact an administrator, and then many times that administration has contacted our office to take appropriate actions. The fourth and final step is the recovery when an incident occurs. And once again, I was very moved by Mr. DeAngelis' experiences. You need to have your school and your community, once again, to promote a positive environment, coping skills once again. And finally, it's according to the plans and all the statistical data that I've read, in all phases of recovery, school provides the greatest degree of support when routines and social activities are maintained. So once again, from a mental health standpoint, every one of our schools have their individual plans in place for their individual schools, and those individuals that have been identified to address those student needs. All that information in the means of a school evacuation is put into a go box, goes actually with the administration to a evacuation site or a reunification site, et cetera, so that immediate actions can take place.
Thank you very much for that very thorough response and explanation. And Carol, I'm sure you're seeing a lot of this just unfold, even at a middle school, even though we may not think as a community, not seeing it every day, that mental health issues are affecting your job and what you do. Can you give us about a minute and a half, 2 minutes of response to that question as well?
Yes, mental health is a huge issue, and when he mentioned cutting, it's rampant. Fortunately, the good thing is it's exactly the way it is reported. A trusting students care about each other, they report it. The part that frustrates me is the parent reaction to it. Yes, we know about it or we're dealing with it, but we feel more, we see the child in terms of grades falling and all of the factors that build together, how they're acting, who they're talking with at lunch. But I think the part we need to work on is the seriousness that the parents need to take. But cutting is huge.
Thank you very much. The next question is for Keith. We want to talk a little bit about building safety. What are the school's biggest strengths and vulnerabilities? Excuse me, you all. I know I did graduate from high school, undergrad, and master's. I promise you that. Reading is fundamental. Okay, how are schools capitalizing on strengths and mitigating these weaknesses?
Well, as far as our buildings are concerned, our buildings are made of heavy commercial grade materials. We have reinforced masonry walls and steel doors, heavy wood doors, things like that. We have the fire prevention code, fire alarms, sprinklers. We have conventional alarm systems. We have camera systems. We have lockdown buttons in every one of our schools, which acts like a panic button and automatically locks or shuts down card readers at all of our exterior entrances. All those things work together to enhance safety. I'm a recent transplant from law enforcement. I think most of the guys here that wear a badge would probably agree with me that our building safety is probably 10% infrastructure and 90% human. We are our own worst enemy. Our biggest vulnerabilities are not the actual construction of the buildings themselves, but it's the failure to comply with policy and making sure that we're doing those things, the simple things every day that can actually get us hurt. One of my biggest pet peeves is propping doors open. When your school's in session, every exterior door should be locked. And you should have one way in and one way out, and you should actually have access control at that point of entry, and it should be monitored, and you should control who's coming in and out of your buildings. Where we sometimes have a lapse in discipline or a lapse in supervision is allowing our employees to prop those doors open and then forget, or even to forget to lock those doors. And we give someone an easy path directly into our buildings and direct access to our staff and students. So again, it's the simple stuff. In the mornings as you start school, make sure you, assistant principal, trusted custodian, somebody makes the rounds and makes sure that your shields are up, per se, that all your doors are locked and you're ready to go. Also, your building systems, your alarm systems, anything that would trigger a response to your local 911 center, things like that. Those things need to be checked daily to make sure they're in operation. We've made visits, and it's not to tell our own folks, but we go by our own lessons learned from our own experiences. And, we walk into a school and their camera system not even be operational. And that school had 68 cameras. It wasn't even turned on. It's the simple things that get us, okay? So make sure you're doing your daily checks. Make sure you keep your doors locked. Make sure your personnel are wearing employee badges that readily identify them as employees of the school system. See something, say something, make sure that persons that you're not familiar with are challenged to ask them why they're in the building. That's why we have employee badges. You should have a good access control program. We don't want to let persons in our buildings that do not belong there. And there have been cases, I'm sure that you're aware of, you've read stories, internet articles, or what have you, about convicted sex offenders gaining access to schools, persons coming into the schools that want to do harm. Look at your access control, look at the layout of your building, and try to exploit or maximize the actual construction of the building to your advantage. And you don't want to have access control where people come into the building and you're not, in direct observation of that access control point. We know that happens, but we want to try to mitigate those as much as possible. You need to see who's coming in your building, and by all means, please do not entrust that responsibility to a student. We've seen that happen. You cannot make a teenager responsible for the lives of hundreds of people. It's not good practice, and we need to make sure that we're not doing that.
And at some of the schools I've seen even where the first encounter they have is where perhaps a parent volunteer would sit. So there's not necessarily a staff person who's there to meet visitors if someone would get into school. So I see that there's some areas that definitely need to be addressed.
Absolutely. We should not entrust those responsibilities to non-employees. Those non-employees are not normally subject to our policy and procedures. They're there as volunteers, and we can't hold them accountable. And, if something happens, who is ultimately responsible for that school? And that'd be the principal and the management above you at that level. And so it's your responsibility as a principal to make sure that all these things are happening on a daily basis and adjust your staffing or your policies and procedures accordingly to make it better.
Thank you very much. A lot of times we don't know this is a problem until it is a problem. So that's definitely something, those are things we need to be aware of. Let's look at something that we all talk about. I know you all deal with, parents, yes, we deal with it, and administrators and educators, you deal with it, and that is the impact of social media. We talk about it a lot, but I don't think we can talk about it enough because it continues to spill over and create issues that we deal with in our schools. So we'll start with Carol with this next question to ask, what strategies have you used to promote the appropriate use of social media, not only among students, but also amongst the staff as well?
Okay, it begins in the primary grades, and we continue, you're right, we continue to promote and promote. We all sign an acceptable use policy, but not just signing that, we review what the policy actually means instead of just pushing a piece of paper. We are doing more and more with password security. The part that we stress to our students the most is their digital footprint. And no matter how hard elementary works, when we get them in middle school, they just don't get it, that once it's out there, it's out there. One of our biggest frustrations, and our teachers are using social sites like Edmodo and trying to teach appropriate. They come to the technology training with the center and they learn those things. We're doing cyber safety, we're doing digital citizenship, intellectual property, and on and on and on. But we have guest speakers come in. We have a detective in Bridgeport that comes in and talks about how he poses as a 14-year-old girl and lures these people in, and then how scary that can be. But we just aren't making the impact. And I think with the sexting thing has been big, and the frustration from an administrative standpoint is you start with a situation that involves a social networking, but then you end up, the problem at the end of the day is, well, you took their phone, or how can I get their phone back? And you just want to say, rewind. What's the real problem? But my fear is for my students, and I tell them that. I am afraid for you because there are people out there that can, with social media, can find you in, what is it now, 6 questions that they can look or ask and know exactly where you are and what you're doing, and they just don't get it about what they're putting out there in terms of photographs, comments. I know that here even, I heard years ago a speaker from CAMC, and they said that's part of what they do when they interview people. They're looking at Facebook. What do you have out there? They're going back on these social media sites and how important and how harmful it can be to their future. But my middle schoolers don't get it no matter how much we do.
And what about at high school? Stan, what do you see as how this is affecting what you deal with on a daily basis?
Well, we call it Facebook, Twitter Monday, because all the problems that happen over the weekend manifest themselves Monday morning as soon as you get in. And we have not done an official study. We've talked about it like we're going to, but I may do that when I get back and just do a day and see how much time we dedicate to social media issues in a school day, because it's actually unnerving that much instructional time is taken away to bring a kid to the office and deal with a problem that has spouted up over the internet. And the problem is that these kids are almost given a tool that they aren't fully aware of how to use correctly yet. And like Carol said, as much as we try and tell them, they go off on their own, and the parent response is horrible. The parents are more worried about getting the device back so they can give it back to the kid so the kid doesn't bother the parent anymore than they are worried about the initial cause and problem that they face. So we deal with it every day, a lot of times all day. And if your policies and procedures don't have something in there that you can address social media issues in school with school response, you ought to look into getting that to help you out, because I tell you, it's something that is going to be the future problem for all of us in the schools as long as schools exist, because it's just getting worse by the day.
Yes, absolutely. It's interesting to have this conversation as a parent with educators to see what they deal with, because I do agree that parents aren't responsive enough. And a question I often have with parents who give devices to their children at very young ages: would you put them out on a very busy interstate alone, unattended, without any guardianship whatsoever? And they would say, of course not. And I say, why? Well, they may run in front of a car that's going 80 miles an hour. Well, aren't you doing the same exact thing when you put this device in their hand and throw them out into a digital world unattended? Because wherever your children are, and I've had to learn this the hard way, but wherever my kids are, I want to be also. That's how I got on Twitter. That's how I got on Facebook. And this other stuff is just driving me crazy. And there have been times in the middle of the day when I have said, take it down, or else I will be at the school to deal with this. And I think that as a parent, you have to be where your children are, digitally, physically, or whatever. All right, that's my soapbox. Next question is for everyone. And we're going to start with Keith. The question is, what worries you and keeps you awake at night and just absorbs, I guess, your attention and your concerns?
Well, we're always concerned about our worst case scenarios, anything that would be a mass casualty producing event. And there are all numbers of different types of hazards, and all respect to Mr. DeAngelis, thank you very much, God bless you, and we've learned a great deal of lessons, unfortunately, from what happened at your school. But we have to be prepared that that might happen any given day, and everybody needs to keep the mindset that this is possible here.
Yes.
I agree with Mr. DeAngelis and where he stated that there's disbelief. There's a lot of people who believe it won't happen in their local hometown or their community. Nobody can predict the future. Nobody's clairvoyant. I know some people claim to be. Maybe they are. But we're not, as administrators and managers. We have to face the reality that that potential threat is there every single day. And we need to have good policy and make good preparation, actually practice and drill ahead of time in case that does happen. We recently rolled out that Kanawha County Schools was going to implement the ALICE program here to all our staff and students. And we're looking at about 33,000 people total in this community. There are already some parents that are resisting. And my question to the community is, why do you not want us to do this? What are you afraid of? Some people fear that we'll traumatize the kids during practice. We're going to roll this out very carefully. And, we're not going to have ski mask covered bandits running through the hallways firing off blanks and scaring our children to death. But we will teach them what they need to know, other methods to get out of their classroom, how to barricade a classroom if necessary. Being able to react immediately if something happens, and training and empowering them to make those decisions at their level to save their own life. Because we know through actual incidents, that people will do, hopefully, what saves their lives. We don't want to create policies or train them to do things contrary to that if it's going to lead to their harm. So, can you continue to work on that? I'm worried about not only our own homespun, maybe students that might commit these types of assaults, but I'm also worried, thinking internationally also, that our buildings can be, predominantly our students and our staff, can be targeted by factions who are aligned with ISIS or some other foreign terrorist group. And we had a couple of what we call swatting incidents back in April. And this was where a telephone call was made to an elementary school in our jurisdiction, and it was a foreign sounding voice, and the voice threatened to kill all the students in the school. It happened on 2 different occasions. And to this date, those cases have not been solved, because the way the phone system works, it's routed overseas, and then after a point it terminates and you can't follow up anymore. So we still have not identified who made those phone calls, but you imagine the response. The first time around it had a whole community response, and we had a SWAT team responding and on all those types of things. And the second one, we kind of assessed the threat and had a similar but scaled down response to that event. But the possibility is real. All these radicalized lone offenders out there, if they think it will further the cause of ISIS or some other group, then they possibly target our schools. And that is the worst case scenario that we think about when we're preparing and doing our emergency planning and training.
Thank you very much. Charlie, what keeps you up at night?
Well, I'll try to be a little briefer than last time. I would like to mimic something that Keith just alluded to. I too have had folks call me from our schools from time to time and said, and there again, folks, I'm not being stereotypical, but said, we had a Mideastern person who walked into our school today because the door wasn't secure, wanted to know how many students that we had enrolled there, and indicated that he had actually went to that school 20 years earlier. It was a primary school. And it so happens that on the very next day, there was a different individual from the same descent that came in and asked the same type of questions. So literally, in this position as a safety director, we wear different hats, and Keith and I wear the same hats. But we run a regulatory training center. We try to do safety for that covers 700 square miles and antiquated old schools. Now, Kanawha counties have some very up-to-date schools, but a lot of our schools are very antiquated, circa 1930s, 40s, and things like that. So those type of threats are prevalent and they exist. And I know at one point it was so overwhelming to me, and I was so fearful, that I was actually ready to leave the county, saying there's no way that an individual can take the necessary precautions and steps to protect all the students. So we were blessed that Captain Vitito, Keith, came on board. Another caveat or something, and I'll get on a soapbox just for a second, is it seems like that in our county school system, we have a lot of socioeconomic problems also, and a lot of parents expect the educators to almost be the parent. And there's a direct correlation between violent video games and kids being able to separate, fantasy from reality, and there's data that indicates that we're more predisposed to activities for kids who participate in those type of activities. So all that information coupled together with the external threats, the internal threats, the type of activities that our children are participating in has had a profound effect on me and has caused me to lose sleep on many, many nights.
Thank you very much. Stan, do you want to respond to that question?
I think, and it's pretty much echoing what Keith and Charlie just said, is it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when it's going to happen. With the training that we've received, it's it could be international, it could be local, but it's going to happen. And the bad thing is we in West Virginia, West Virginia has the lowest crime rate in the nation. Our whole population is 1.8 million. we feel like we're in our own little world that is safe and secure, and it is a great place to raise children, this, that, and the other. But along with that comes complacency, and we have to make sure that we're not complacent. We have to make sure that we are on alert. We do notice things that are different. We do keep an eye out for things that are out of place and don't seem right. And truthfully, we deal with so many things as a community, with domestic violence, with mental health problems, with just downright criminals that are in our communities. It's hard to protect a building full of people from any of that anywhere, much more a school. And I've always likened a school to a small city. Each room is a house with 30 occupants, and you have to be, as a principal, be the mayor of that city. You have to overwatch that city. You have to manage that city. And along with that comes the responsibility to make it as hard of a target as it can be. And and you all have such a daunting task, like I said earlier, because what are the school boards and everything pushing you toward nowadays is making the school more of a community building, which opens it up at more hours of the night. I was in the school the other day, it's the middle of summer, and there were kids playing basketball in our auxiliary gym. And the athletic director said, I wonder why they're in there. Well, he went down and found out that one of the coaches decided he wanted to run some kids through the gym. Nobody knew. Nobody checked in, and there again, that can lead to problems later on, because you have to know what's going on, and you gotta keep track. But.
Carol?
As a principal, it's when it happens, and there's not a PRO in the building, and there's no one from the county office in the building. It's me at the end of the day, and my assistant. And will we be able? It really does. You think about it. Will I be able to? How will I get a warning to my staff if it's happening in the front of the building? Will I have the time to get to the button that's in my office? How will I react? And we've had a couple of incidences, and I believe we did do the right thing. We locked it down, and we went towards the perpetrator as administrators and had those thoughts of, this is how it's going to end for me, and this really isn't what I signed up for. But that's what we do. And then I worry about, with all the training we give our staff, are we training them the right way? And I appreciate Kanawha County, and we had some training with the CPD, and they said, you do what you have to do and what's right, and ask for forgiveness later. If the kids can get them out, So it's kind of a mixed message. So we can't just tie our teachers so they're afraid to react, that the consequence for not following the policy, but when doing so, kids get hurt, or they get hurt. So it's a lot to think about. It's a big job. And the principals, it's us at the end of the day. We're right there, or our assistants there, and we're not there. So are they prepared?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's interesting, that all that you have to be concerned about, all the possible threats, physical, people, whomever, it's so much to consider. And I know we're going to get to the other side of this. I'm so glad that Frank talked about some of the promise and the hope and the triumphs, because this is a very heavy subject. Some, of course, things that definitely need to be addressed. The folks who have come in and terrorized our school, they look like kids, they look like us. They don't necessarily look like they come from another country. And so the threat is real, the threat is right there, and it's people that we are dealing with on an everyday basis. Let's move on to the next question. Are we overconfident in how well teachers and students are trained to respond to school emergencies? And I want to talk a little bit about the capacity that is there currently to respond to this, and the capacity that needs to be created to respond to this. And we're going to start with Keith on this question as well. Can you give us your response to that, or your thoughts on that?
Well, on the question of whether our students and staff are overconfident in their ability to actually carry out the emergency action plan and respond to a crisis, let me just say this. I've been involved in a lot of emergency exercises and drills over the years, and there's always a tendency for us when we do the after-action review, no matter what the venue, what agency, to gloss over our mistakes and look at the things that we did right and not necessarily have a plan of action to correct what we did wrong and following up with that process. All too often we'll have a lockdown drill or another agency will have an exercise and nobody got hurt, so everybody did well. Well, it's an exercise. Nobody should get hurt. You know, we have to look at, were the procedures carried out? Were the procedures credible, viable? Did people faithfully execute those procedures? And then what is the realistic result from that? And identify those weaknesses and then have an improvement plan to make it better. We do, at times, become a little bit overconfident. One of the problems with a lack of planning in our schools for, say, an armed intruder event is that in the past, a conventional lockdown would just be, you know, teachers locking their doors, closing their curtains or blinds, turning off the lights, hurrying the kids into a corner, telling them to be quiet. You know, they didn't really take into account that statistically they're just as likely to be involved in a shooting incident in an open area like a cafeteria, a hallway. It might be a transition between classes. Have you ever thought about that? So we have a very simple two-dimensional problem and almost mechanical response to that without any flexibility or the training and the empowerment that goes behind that to actually let them think on their feet to say, hey, I can assess the situation. Instead of locking down, the best course of action for me and my students right now is climb through that ground floor window and run off campus to escape the danger. So that's the whole culture change in trying to convey how important it is that they study the material and then they practice. One of the old adages in military and law enforcement is train as you fight. On lockdown procedures, the way they have been, we're not training as we would actually be operating. We're training, in some cases, deluding ourselves into a false sense of security that just locking our doors is going to be enough. How many of these school shooting incidents have occurred where the suspects have shot through the doors, gained access, hit the exit device, you know, easy access into the building? Multiple times. You can't rely on doors alone to keep bad guys out. They are temporary barriers only. Sometimes we get a false sense of security that the building's going to take care of us. That's not the case. They're all temporary barriers. People ask, well, why would you want them to barricade inside their classroom? Because the lock will fail on that door eventually. If someone is highly determined to get in that room, especially if they have a firearm and they're shooting into the lock set, that door will fail eventually. The door is buying us time. The barrier will again complicate the situation for our intruder and slow them down even more. And we're trying to buy time for you to react to the situation and maybe have a plan, but also more time for our law enforcement officers to get in the building who are now, thanks to the doctrinal shift after 1999, are rapidly responding in nearly every jurisdiction in this country. They're going to get in there as fast as they can, but we need to buy them that time. And we need to do things as the school employees to better protect our students. And you know, let's not train facetiously, you know, thinking that just locking our doors is going to be enough. Let's think about multiple hypothetical scenarios and then actually train on those scenarios so that we can react appropriately when that situation happens.
I want to make sure that we keep a close eye on the time, and Emily, you can tell me. I think we probably have about 5 minutes or so. So we're going to move to our final question and give everyone an opportunity to respond to this. And it's very simple. What is your most important tip to principals to help them promote school safety? And also, if you would like to address in that, what is your most important tip to families so that they can support you as you're trying to support a healthy learning environment at your school? And Carol, we'll start with you, and then we'll move to Stan.
I think with families, just to be visible at events with the students so that the parents feel comfortable coming to you and reporting something that they hear when the kids are in the back seat of the van and they hear kids talking, that they come and talk to you and know that you can keep that in their confidence, but have a dialogue with parents. The most important tip, I would say, is two things. First, if you can get the active shooter training in your school, don't hesitate. It's something that I think you can't do often enough. And just remember that, unfortunately, it's not if, it's when.
Stan?
One thing I would say, and this is to piggyback on Keith's, you know, we do fire drills all the time. We have to. It's mandated. It's in stone. I want you all to do something the first fire drill you have. Go block a door that they're supposed to go out and watch what your teachers do. They have no clue. I had PhDs in my school that couldn't believe they couldn't go through a door. I said, what's on fire? You can't go through there. There's fire there. They didn't know how to redirect because they've got it so much in their tunnel vision head that that's where they go out. Now that's something they've done forever. And yet you throw something in and it throws them off. Imagine a real scenario, something really bad happening. You know, pretty much whatever works, works. And the more you train, as Carol said, getting the active shooter training, taking it seriously and putting it in place, it will help you and help your staff. And again, it makes them have an ownership to it, that they're a part of it. So just put whatever training you can in to help them, and that will in turn help them protect the students that they have.
Excellent. Expect the unexpected. Charlie?
Well, I just wanted to make a comment as far as principals go. I wanted to give caveat to the Board of Risk and Insurance Management. They have an excellent risk management program that Kanawha County schools follow. The thing that I would encourage principals to do is to make sure that their schools have a very proactive safety committee that meets, and that they also do facility inspections. As a result of Kanawha County schools' safety committees and facility inspections, we have determined some vulnerabilities. We've been able to allocate some resources to address those issues, to secure our schools, and to make them safer. So I would encourage principals to make sure their schools had a monthly inspection and a committee members that meet on a monthly basis.
Thank you. And Keith?
There was a study reported by Campus Safety Magazine in reference to what is the most neglected thing as far as school security goes. And the largest category by far was the lack of emergency planning and training. Cannot stress that enough. Again, our buildings, as far as security goes, maybe account for 10%, but 90% of it relates to how individuals react, follow policy, and conduct themselves in that crisis. You can't train enough. Time is very limited. You know, we're facing our own constraints with our school system and trying to get our personnel trained. It's going to take time, but it needs to be a daily thing, a daily discussion, and constant supervision to make sure that it all works. When you do your scenarios, again, think about how it's actually going to occur. Test it locally. Have those little, water fountain meetings in the morning with your staff and throw scenarios back and forth. You got to think hypothetically. Stan has a perfect example. You block a door during a fire drill and they don't know what to do. We have to be better at reacting to peculiar circumstances and things that change the situation dynamically. Part of our armed intruder training is to try to empower our staff to make those decisions on the spot and not wait for an administrator or somebody to tell them what to do on the intercom. Mm-hmm. Very hard to do because most people don't want to take that risk. But, it is a training issue and we'll keep working on it. But just don't give up. What you do is extremely, extremely important. God bless you. I wish you all the best of success. Stay on them. Be that leader that they expect you to be. And it's every single day. I had an old sergeant major told me one time, he said, leadership is an uncomfortable place. If you're comfortable, you're not doing your job. Think of it that way. You have to be on top of it every single day. Thank you.
Excellent words. And finally, as we close, I just want to share an experience that I recently had, and you can share this with your parents. It may work. Some Twitter garbage was going on and with one of my children, and so I didn't know if you all knew this, but I'm bilingual, and I speak English, and then I speak mom, and I speak Grant Street West Side mom, which is a different kind of mom of anybody who's familiar with the Charleston area. And so when I realized there was nonsense going on, I told my child, "Give me your phone." And she said, "Why?" And I said, "Give me your phone." And I took the phone and I said, "Now who is this person?" And she told me who it was. I said, "Well, what's the phone number?" So I called the phone number and I said, "Let me speak to your mother." Because as parents, sometimes we just need to go straight to the source and cut it off right there. And a lot of times the parent doesn't know what their child is doing. So you can use that. You're welcome to. It worked very well. And lastly, when my child was 5 and he was hitchhiking, trying to hitchhike by the side of the road, my mother saw him and grabbed him by the scruff of his neck and pulled him back because he was in danger. So I say to our parents and our teachers, sometimes you just got to grab them by the scruff of their necks. Thank you all very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.